Hey guys, and welcome back to the second episode of the Athletic Development UK podcast. I'm really delighted today. We've got a fantastic guest ready for you. And we're going to delve into the world of biomechanics, go into and try and understand a bit more about how important it is to move a lot more freely, get the importance of movement, and try and hopefully quash a few myths. So without further ado, Tom Waldron, welcome to the show, buddy. It's great to have you.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm very, very good. So yeah, firstly, thanks very much for coming on. I know you're a really busy man. You've got loads of education stuff going on, seminars to prepare for. So just want to give yourself, introduce yourself a little bit to the guys, give them a bit of information on your background and how you got into the industry.
Yeah, yes, my name's Tom. So yeah, I think I've nearly been in the industry for about 10 years now. So I kind of, as soon as I got into it really quickly. So I started in Pilates and personal training. So that was my initial, I guess, background professionally. I was really lucky where I've got two older sisters and they're both amazing dancers. And one of them was a professional ballet dancer.
Wow.
And so she, after her career, her rehabilitation after she got injured was Pilates. And she ended up training in Pilates and actually opened a Pilates studio in Devon. And me being super, super newly qualified and literally knew nothing, I was teaching all these clients in the studio for her. So that was like a really cool couple of years of like a boot camp, really, where my sister was traveling all over the world. She was teaching for people and doing all these courses. And I was kind of just like, with not much of an aim really, just kind of teaching, but I knew I really enjoyed it. So I always found lots of joy in teaching movement and helping people move better. And I didn't really know why, to be honest. I just really enjoyed it. Every day was really fun. And I just thought it was really cool that you could spend a day that you really enjoyed earning money and being with people and just kind of doing stuff that you thought was good for, I guess, the community. So that was kind of my in, really. And then from that, I kind of moved more into rehab, I suppose, more physical therapy stuff. And that introduced me to the biomechanics, which I know you've done with Rachel France.
Yeah.
And I'm quite closely associated with the Franklin method as well. So that's another education that also is very biomechanical in its emphasis. But we also look at the brain and how to, again, improve movement. And yeah, so that's all been really fun for me, really. I've been really lucky to travel all over the world. Hopefully this year, maybe a little bit COVID considering. Yeah, would. But at the same time, online has been an absolute gift as well. I don't know where we'd be without online. So it's been really cool. It's been really fun, actually, like having been online, it's been really fun to actually be able to meet people who I probably wouldn't meet that often. So for example, tomorrow, it's like I'm meeting people from Singapore and South Korea and America. So it's just quite fun to be able to do that, even though it's awesome to also be in person. I think online also has its benefits,
Geez, that's not bad at all, that is it? So you could argue to an extent that, this lockdown's created a lot more opportunities for your reach and to help people improve the quality of movement, reduce pain and anxiety and stress and everything. So what is biomechanics? Because people, it's a word that's thrown out there a lot. And I mean, I know that we talk a lot about the improvement of you've got to move more to lose weight, you got to move more to improve your range of movement quality, reduce risk of injury and everything. But for younger athletes, for example, what does when you hear the word biomechanics, what does it scream to you?
Yeah, well, what it used to scream to me. So I say that first. So I've studied that for a long time, and what I used to think biomechanics was, I used to always say, well, it's the mechanics of the body. And even though that's not wrong, but that's kind of how I used to always think about it. Obviously we're not mechanical. So humans are an organism. There's nothing mechanical about us. So an easy way to explain that is all of our tissues is soft. So we haven't got any hard matter. We're not made of hard matter. So because we're not made of hard matter, that means that the forces that go through our body don't travel linearly like they might do in a machine. So even though we say biomechanics, I guess in my head, I always think of it as like a metaphor. So really what biomechanics is, it's the study of how forces are transferred and dissipated through the body. And even though if you say that to someone who doesn't really know anything about anatomy, it sounds a bit like, okay, like it doesn't really make any sense.
It's
so
a hard way. It's because it's so hard to describe, isn't it? Because there's so much involved. Like you rightly say there, the things like your force absorption, you change your direction, how your body's absorbing it, and the impact it has on your joints. Yeah, it is something that's fascinated me for years. And obviously doing the course is brilliant. And being able to implement that with younger athletes, especially, it's fascinating because if you look at a lot of athletes nowadays, they tend to retire early, and the biggest reason for that is because it's either injury or they're in too much pain. But then you look, I don't know if you watch a lot of like elite sports clubs and how they warm up. But one of the things that I just cannot get my head around is static stretching, and why they do it at the beginning of a training session. Because of course, if you're going, the whole purpose, of course, of a warm up is to prepare your body for the actions and the motions that are going to be going on. So doing something like a static hamstring stretch, it baffles me, because surely you want to be doing like a linear. Well, those that don't know what linear means, it's basically forward movement. You want to be doing like a linear run with like little stiff leg flicks, things like that, and I just don't get it. I mean, in terms of importance of understanding your body, where do you think we should start? Do you think it should be a case of we go for a run to improve our fitness, or do you think it should be a case of we should be looking at our weaknesses and developing
I think with that, I think one thing is language is really important. So even though I can sit here and be like, oh, biomechanics is how the body deals with you could be like, oh, that's technically right, but does that really help anyone? So unless you're a health professional who maybe is interested in biomechanics or sports person, that's probably not going to be a very meaningful explanation. So to harken back to your first bit, I think I would just mainly say, like, biomechanics is your movement. So I think Rachel says this, you don't do biomechanics, like you move your body, and the study of movement, we can call that biomechanics. So I think, like, and then to go into your next bit, so to talk about, let's say, okay, so you have a body, you want to move it in a certain way, or you want to condition it in a certain way so you can perform certain tasks well, whether that's performance, sports specific, or if it's just moving throughout your daily life and being efficient and not being in pain. I think it's also then it's really helpful for people, like you say, I think it's helpful for health professionals to really be aware of, like, what are we actually working with? So what's the fabric or what's the material of the body that we work with? So to go off like stretching, for example. So I think, it's pretty well accepted at this point. I'm not someone who's anti-stretching. I think, there's a time and place for it. And also if someone enjoys stretching, they're not going to take that away from them. However, there's always that context, isn't there? So if you're going to do a deadlift and you're going to deadlift like 200 kilos, or if you're going to start playing football or taekwondo, as you and I were talking about before the podcast, like if you're going to do something explosive with a lot of load, probably static stretching isn't going to benefit you. And I think you and I can say, we can obviously dissect that, and like maybe more of like an academic way of explaining why you wouldn't do that is we know that it downregulates certain proprioceptors. That's not very good for the stretch reflex, and there's loads of problems there. But again, unless you've got an athlete or a person who would listen to that, I think really what you want to go into is like, I think even looking at nature can sometimes be a useful way to explain things. So if you look at I sometimes use the example of like a gazelle. So if you look at a gazelle, like, and it's like running through like whatever the environment that a gazelle lives in, like the forest, whatever, like the desert or the forest, whatever. So it's like, you have a gazelle running, like you don't see the gazelle like do this
exactly.
No, like what you're normally going to see is it's always slightly in motion, which you can call that postural sway if you want, or whatever. It's always slightly in motion, or it might do that kind of that yawning sort of, like, you see a cat or a dog do those sort of yawns, and we do it too. You get up in the morning, you kind of like move, and people call that pandiculation, but it's kind of this idea that you don't have to elongate, quote unquote, elongate tissues to suddenly do a movement. The idea is if you want to do something well, then the preparation for that task should mirror that task as closely as possible. So I would say, for example, let's say you're a runner and you're going to run, let's say you're off-piste runner and you're going to run up and down and run through, different terrains, probably doing a hamstring stretch isn't going to totally mirror the biomechanical requirements for that. And I think, just to give 2 examples, so one would be, one, you're down regulating the brain or the nervous system, I'd say better. So, the stretch reflexes and the hamstrings, they're not going to be quite as finely tuned as you probably want them to be if they've been stretching for like 30 minutes statically, compared to dynamically. I would just get them running, to be honest, as the second, just get them to start running slowly or at a comfortable pace. And then I think a lot of it comes down to, we make things too complicated, to be honest, as trainers or as therapists. Do you know what I mean? I think we always think you have to have like an exercise to do something well. And I think most of the time, the body actually can configure itself in the most optimal way. But we can do things like, let's do a warm up, like a dynamic warm up, or even a mental warm up. But I don't think we have to have like a million exercises just to go for a run,
Yeah, I think because a lot of people just want it to look dead sexy, don't they? They just want it to look really appealing. And this sort of, and it comes on to the we spoke about it just before we came live about the running mechanics side of it, and a lot of athletes that are in elite academies, for example, at the moment, or even at grassroots level, they go on and they say about, you need to work on your running mechanics, but why do you need to work on your running mechanics? Is it because you're not fast enough? Is it because you can't change your direction? And again, Rachel's got this phrase of "so what." Okay, it came up quite a lot on the biomechanics course, and it's like, well, you can't go faster, but so why can't you go faster? Is it because you're not using your arms correctly? Is it because you've got a tight hamstring? Is it because you're quad dominant? Is it because you've got valgus, or your knees are going inwards? Or is it because you're not psychologically prepared, which you touched upon a moment ago in terms of with the peaks and everything? Because preparing the body's key, and like you already said, if the animals are just literally going for it and having the different movements and what have you. And sometimes the most boring exercises are the most useful. For example, the running, going and having going for a walk for 10 meters, 20% effort, 30% effort for another 5 meters, then gradually building up, and then having a short sprint, and making, like you already said again, making it specific to that sport and that event that you're going to do. That's only going to improve muscle memory and get the body moving in the way that it should be, as opposed to having your quad stretch or making sure that you're doing loads of toe touch squats and things like that, which is it's just dead important, I think.
Yeah, I think we also, sorry to cut you off, by the way, but I think we put rules on the body that, one, is hardly proven or is completely not proven. Like, so for example, like, and this is actually not, I mean, to mention Rachel France again, actually, but this is one of workshops on running is, there's like hardly any evidence to no evidence that there's one running style that's better than the other. And there's obviously many types of running styles, but there's like 3 main ones that people kind of talk about, like hind foot, forefoot, or the midfoot striking. But yeah, it's funny, like, people try and talk about, well, maybe this style of running, you get more elastic recoil, so you're going to move more efficiently, or this, but there's really not a lot of evidence for it. And I think then it's like, well, how do we resolve that then as coaches? Like, so if you're a running coach, or if you coach people who run, like, how do you, if there's no better style of running, then how do you coach running? And I think a lot of it comes down to really the person in front of you. So what are their goals, obviously, is one. And then, as you were saying, like, so if there are any issues, so for example, we know that if someone is a hind foot runner, so that means that they're going to typically run on their heel, which is what I do, by the way. You're going to have more force go through the knee when the foot meets the floor. However, if you're a forefoot runner, you're going to have more force go through the ankle.
Yeah.
So either way, you still have the force go somewhere. You don't get rid of the force. It just goes to different parts of the body, or at least is emphasized in different parts of the body. So if someone's got knee issues when they're running, I mean, one thing would be before you change their running style, you should look at their cadence, obviously, you should look at their speed, but also their conditioning. Are they strong enough?
Yeah, exactly.
But it might be useful later on if none of that helps. Maybe you can slowly change their running style so there's less pressure on the knee. So it's kind of like, rather than say, oh, this is the best running style, it always comes down to the context, I think.
Yeah.
And your brain's going to organize you in a certain way to have you move a certain way. And I always think, unless there's an obvious issue that person isn't doing very well, the brain knows better than we do how that body should be organized.
Yeah, definitely.
And we can have our theories about biomechanics and technique and this, and it's all great. But I always think, if someone's moving a certain way, there's a reason why they're moving that way.
Yeah, definitely. It depends on the time of the season it is as well. So if it's football or rugby, of course we're going to limit in terms of how many sprints they're doing. So if they're doing like fartlek training, like 20 sprints, for example, we did something similar at Bradford a couple of years back, where we'd get the lads in pre-season and they'd do, I think it was 20-meter shuttles for a certain period of time, and they'd have X amount of recovery. But we wouldn't even dream of doing that during the season, for the simple fact that we've got to consider the recovery rate, the amount of load that's going through the body. Even if it's just, it sounds stupid, but even if we're just walking and carrying a bag on the back, it's still going to have an impact on their posture. So they might end up like kyphos, like leaning forwards, or lower back pain, or little twinges lower back pain. These are things that we don't really think about, because if you're carrying a holdall for 15, 20, 30 minutes because they can't get in the car or they can't get a bus, for example, it's still going to have an effect on where the force is going. So you can have a downward force, and then you're going into like vertical jumps, for example, or depth jumps, jumping off of boxes. And it's sort of like force is coming from different angles, isn't it? And the sort of inertia that's being created is then going to have an impact on recovery. And I think it's, like I said, like we've spoken about quite a bit, is understanding your body, what you need to do, and understanding what stage you're at, most importantly as well, of your athletic career, and not comparing yourself, because it's very, very easy to watch these different athletes and say, right, well, I want to be like strongman, for example. I want to be like the Stoltman brothers, or if you're a runner, I want to be like Dino Asher Smith. But do you really know what goes into those athletes' makeup? Because they might be training 2-3 times a week, but then they're having an ice bath. Then they've got a nutritionist that's sorting out their specifics. Like their body weight will obviously dictate how much protein they're going to get reimbursed with, and it's very, very easy.
The factors are crazy, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sleep is a huge thing, isn't it? Sleep is, I mean, as I'm sure you're well aware of. I mean, there's a great book. I keep meaning to read it. I've read bits of it, but it's called "Why We Sleep."
I'm going to find my pen now, because I'm going to got my pen. I can write it down.
It's he did a great podcast too with Joe Rogan. It's brilliant. It's called "Why We Sleep," and I think it's by Matthew Walker. So he's a British neuroscientist. It's honestly, it's so interesting. And it's all about the science of sleep, really. And it goes into different facets of sleep and recovery. And he talks a lot about, and it's all evidence-based. So he talks a lot about the cognitive aspect, what happens to you cognitively, even if you lose an hour of sleep. And it's really quite amazing. I don't want to say too many figures in case I get them wrong, but one thing he was talking about, I think it was with NFL players, was how dramatically their injury rate or chances of injury increased when they were underslept. And I think they did a 10-year review of them keeping track of these athletes throughout their season. And it was when they reported having poor bouts of sleep, that was almost always when they got injured.
Wow.
And obviously, there's obviously other factors to that as well, but they were saying, in terms of healing, recovery, but also even just motor control,
That's true,
especially in certain sports where you have to have fine motor control. Even NFL, if you start to get a bit out of sync, you can imagine how that might also influence injury rate. So I think obviously conditioning's massive, resistance training is huge. And as you say, it depends on actually the time of the season. But I think we still do quite a poor job, me included, on just talking about recovery in a active way, active recovery,
exactly.
Like choosing to sleep 8 hours rather than thinking you're lazy, or choosing to, let's say you're increasing the loads, like you work out when you're supposed to take your breaks more, rather than just like thinking you're not working. But I think, again, going back to that, that's all about language, isn't it?
100%.
Like, especially with an athlete or someone who's very competitive, rest isn't a sexy sell, is it? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. It's because people don't understand. It's that muscle mind muscle connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't. And what we don't hear a lot of is the impact of the neuromuscular system, i.e., how the nerves are going to impact as movement. And again, it comes down to, if you've got a shoulder injury on your left side, for example, you could potentially end up with something in your right knee, and people will be like, well, why is that working? Well, it's because of your genetic, not your genetic, but because of the way the central nervous system is made up and how the nerves are connecting and the muscular tissues are all interconnected. And I think there needs to be a bit more education around this, especially at school. People talk about going and doing PE, and I think PE lessons, if I'm being honest, nowadays are very lazy. No disrespect to schools or to anyone who does this, but the PE curriculum, in my opinion, is becoming lazy because well, I say lazy, maybe that's not the right word, but it's not the true value of PE is not getting recognized, because people think that PE is meant to be the time where the children go and play football, or they play rugby, or they do basketball, whatever it might be. But what they don't understand is, by those students or young athletes having that time, that's when they switch off from the stresses at home. They switch off from the stresses of maybe not feeling good enough in the classroom, or from being bullied, or
totally.
And they can get rid of this. And PE really needs to be looked at, not just in the gym or on the hockey field or what have you. It needs to be they need to maybe sit down and say, right, this is how your body works. You might be feeling, you might feel like you've had a bad game today because, like you correctly said a minute ago, Tom, about the sleep patterns. You might have had a really bad night's sleep. So, and the reason they might have had a bad night's sleep is because they were too busy playing Call of Duty, for example, till 2-3 o'clock in the morning, which, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I'll tell you what, with the PE thing, even going away from athletes or people who are into sport for a minute, like I remember obviously being at school. So I remember, I don't know, I have no idea what it's like now, but I remember in the last year or two of school, like PE was a choice, I think. So basically it was like, unless you were doing a GCSE, unless you did a GCSE in sport, PE was totally a choice. And so basically everyone who didn't like sport didn't do PE anymore. And I've got a bunch of mates who are into sport, into games, into art, like real mix. And so I remember when we got a bit older and we're like, in the bar, and I'm with my friends and we're at a table. So whoever has the round next, you go get the beers. And I remember observing my friends who weren't really ever into sport and didn't really participate. Even when they were in PE, they just didn't really get involved. And what I noticed was when they bought their beers and they had a big plate of beers and they're walking over, so they were so much more awkward at navigating physically around like people walking around the bar, or compared to like hopefully myself or other friends who were just into sport and into physical activities. And what I found really interesting was like, so people just think, oh, PE is like this thing you do when you play football or you play cricket, whatever, and that's it, But actually, I think what you're doing more fundamentally is you're teaching people how to physically be in the world in a comfortable way as well. Like how do you navigate around that object that's moving? Or do you know what I mean? And I've just always found it with people who aren't really into that, they're more, not always, but I found them to be more physically awkward when they're trying to just something as simple as, here's some beer, just walk to that table and don't fall in.
Yeah, exactly. It is that balance coordination, or the hand-eye coordination factor, isn't it? Which tennis, prime example, a great way of implementing it. Lacrosse, it is so important. And what frustrates me massively, and when I used to work in schools a few years back, was it would get taken away from the children. If they misbehaved on a session, it would be a case of, right, well, you're not doing PE today. Oh, but miss or sir, I want to do X, Y. That's great, but don't take PE away from them. Don't allow them to go to the after school club. Let them, send them home with some homework, but don't take the fundamentals that are in place set by the government and the education sector. Because at the end of the day, the PE curriculum is there for a reason. Whether I agree with it or don't agree with it is by the by, but it's there for people to get more physical, to move better, which is why schools should be bringing in people like gymnastics coaches and Pilates coaches and because it's not just about educating the children, it's about, of course, educating the teachers and the parents as well, because one of the greatest thing that I enjoy doing the most with my athletes is speaking to the parents after the sessions and explaining that their son or their daughter is, we do a lot of video analysis. So one of the things we do is, right, this was John five weeks ago. This is John now. What differences can you see? And we'll be quiet and say, oh well, his posture's upright, his knee drives, his knees are more under his shoulders, whereas before they were coming across the body and they were sort of doing a Miley Cyrus dance or what have you with their hips and what have you, and they were doing a lot of twisting. And that's they're the biggest rewards for me, is when the parents or the athlete can give the feedback, and they say, do you know what, I actually have done really well on this. I might feel like I'm not developing, like I'm not improving my speed, but I have improved my torso control. I have improved my coordination, my balance, and and then they think about it when they go on the game. And first thing you say to them is, how's your week been? No, it's been all right. But okay, it's been all right. But so what's happened? Well, not much. Okay, so describe to me. I think we're in a world now where we try and draw as much information, or as coaches especially, I'm really guilty of this, is trying to draw as much information from the individual as possible, so that you can have that the most positive impact on them. But sometimes they don't want to give us that information back.
Yeah, sure.
So so as coaches, I think we're guilty sometimes of just relying on, how are they moving, or it could be a case of they're doing a goblet squat, and they can't do a goblet squat this week with a 10-kilogram dumbbell, whereas last week they were absolutely flying with it. They were actually flying with the dumbbell. So the second week we're now having to regress it and maybe take the dumbbell out or reduce the reps, and having to adapt because we don't know how to get the information from the athlete. And I think that's probably gone off track a little bit.
I think it's really it's really important. I think I remember when I wasn't a particularly sporty kid when I was younger. I just wasn't. And I'm still not very coordinated, by the way, at all. I'm still quite clumsy. I talk about with the beers and walking around, but I'm still really clumsy. But so I remember when I was young, I really wasn't that sporty, and I didn't really have much interest in it. And I remember so clearly, I must have been 13, 14, maybe a bit younger. But I remember getting thrown a rugby ball once, and I just had it, and I just started running, and it was almost as if my hormones turned on overnight, and I completely destroyed the whole pitch and had a try. And it was one of those moments of did that actually happen? And then I kind of just realized, oh, I'm really fast, and suddenly I was in all the teams because I was really quick. But it was, what my point is that did so much for my confidence in terms of oh, I'm actually good at this. I can do that. And I can hang out with people that I probably wouldn't normally hang out with because we've got this thing in common where we're on the same team or we're doing this. So I think on so many levels, it's always a shame when the government or whatever it is, they start to cut the arts and the sports.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's kind of all the fun stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the fun, but it's the most, but it's the really fundamentals of life.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is, because if you haven't got your health, then good luck with anything else.
Exactly.
And if you haven't got the arts, good luck having a society. You need to have that. It's so important. And people view sport as an art as well. I got really into skateboarding when I was young, and that is probably more of an art than a sport in some ways, even though it's very physical. And or craft, or even want to call it. But so it's funny, and then going back to your talk about getting information from the athlete. Yeah, it's hard because I think sometimes, like I used to go running all the time when I was a kid, like 15. I'd go running every night, do like
Same here,
5 or 8 mile runs. I just love it. It was so therapeutic. And I used to have coaches ask me like, okay, how fast did you run or da, 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 da. And I never cared to measure that because it was more just fun and I enjoyed it. And I was kind of getting out, even when it was raining, I'd get out and run. And I just think like, I think as coaches, we can get very cerebral when it comes to like data and
yeah.
performance and this and that, which is great because that's kind of what we're there for, obviously.
It is,
But
yeah.
but I think as well, like especially post COVID now, it's so important that people find like, wouldn't it be awesome if everyone preferred some form of exercise over that Netflix show that
Oh
they
yeah,
really like?
exactly.
You know what I mean? And nothing against Netflix, but it would be
No,
all
no,
like,
yeah.
swimming. I mean, what's really cool actually is that there's more people now getting in. I don't know about you in Manchester. I'm not sure if you have it around there, but I'm in the south,
Mm.
and we've got the sea. So people now are just going in the sea with like a beanie on and
Yeah.
just like their trunks, and that's it. And they're not particularly fit people. They wouldn't be people you'd see in the gym, but they're suddenly getting outside and they're putting their body in the elements a little bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really good. It's just so good for you. Like it's a shame. It's a shame that we, like, I always think on one level, like we isolate things because we need to understand how things work, and that can
Yeah.
help when you're learning to isolate stuff. But in truth, we're just a holistic organism, aren't we? So there
Exactly.
is no real separation from your emotional health to your physical health, really. And so when it comes to like children, let's say for example, like back to school, like if you want them to do well in their maths exam, they should probably be moving at least once a day, doing something, because that's going to
Exactly.
send more oxygen to their brain, and that's going to send more nutrients to the brain. And there's quite a bit of evidence for that. I think even in that book I recommended, they talk a lot about that. That you have chess players now, and a lot of them are pretty jacked because they know that actually if they're physically strong, they have more of their they have more of their autonomy essentially
Yeah.
in their cognition. And I don't know all the science behind it, but there seems to be quite a strong
There's a
correlation
lot.
there.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah.
And this is what I love about about studies and constantly learning. And one of the big, I always say to anyone I talk to, athletes or coaches, you can't stop networking. You can't stop asking
Mm.
questions. You can never stop learning. And if you haven't learned a new thing every day, if you've
Yeah.
not learned one thing every day, doesn't matter how silly it is, um, you're not progressing, and you're sort of stuck at a thing. And there's a big one quote that you hear a lot is practice makes perfect. Whereas I try and correct that and say, if practice was perfect, then where's the next progression from there? So one
Absolutely. Yeah.
so one thing I say
Totally.
with my athletes a lot is practice makes permanent, because the more consistent you are with something, and this was something I learned at Northampton Town years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. And obviously, consistency is key with anything. So if you move more, you're gonna be a lot more flexible. You're going to be able to lift more. You're going to be able to run a lot more. You're going to be able to enhance your physical capacity on the pitch, so you can last. In a football game, you can maybe last. If you're more active, you can, and you recover well, then you're more likely to last the full 90, as opposed to you get to the 45th minute. So like, do you know what, Gaffer, my hamstring's a little
Mm.
bit tight, so I need to come off. And we see it more, and I think this alludes to, again, the athlete and the coach communication, and
Mhm.
understanding that relationship that you've got with your body. And and then again, um are you then willing to risk your health to for selfish reasons? Because we don't really look after our bodies. A lot of people don't look after their bodies in the way that as they should, such as matters we've talked about, like food, and like the food and the mindset. Even going in the river with a beanie hat on, and
Yeah.
in the shorts or what have you, it has a massive effect on your body's recovery system, because without going too technical, the way the nervous system works, you go in there, it's that shock, isn't it? You go in there, cold water, and first, the instant reaction, myself included, you go in somewhere cold and you're straight out, or the heating goes on. However, what you're actually doing is it's that hot cold therapy, which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah. Yeah.
you look at the elite athlete setting now. this is what they're doing a lot. And it sounds daft, but just walking, obviously, I'll put a disclaimer in, if it's safe to do so, because I don't want to go encouraging people to go and do it. If it's safe to do it, go and, dip your toes in the sea, or have a hot, cold shower, and see how it feels for you. Because there's I don't know about you, Tom, but I don't think there's a right or wrong way of doing anything. I think it's one of those things that, does it fit for you, and how are you going to benefit, as opposed to, it worked well for Bob the other day, but it's not necessarily going to work well for Joseph. Do you know what I mean? It's
yeah, totally. No, I really think that, like, especially with the body, like, I think I always, one thing I'm not sure how much I say it, but I always think this in my head. I always think, like, I'm just here to give suggestions. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. I know when you're a coach, and maybe if you're working with an athlete, there are those times where they want you to be like, it's this, and that's different. Yeah, that's different. But like, I think when you're working with just even general public as well, it's like, I'm in some way educated in this field, and I'm always trying to get better. So I'm going to give you educated suggestions, but it's really up to you whether you want to do it or not, and we can give it a go. And I just think, it goes back to the idea that we're not machines, like, and I know that's obvious when you hear that, but I think language is so important, because I'm a big fan of biomechanics, but then we can be like, oh, the body's mechanical. And it's like, well, it's not really, in the sense that you don't do A, B, C, and then you get this result for every single person. Because as we've already been mentioning, like, there's a whole psychological element to it. There's a hormonal element to things. And so there's so many factors at play. And this is obviously why it's so good to work in a team, because you're not going to be an expert in all those factors. But yeah, so I just think a lot of things is trying things out and seeing what works for you. Like, I know the evidence can sometimes be a bit conflicting in this, but one thing which there is evidence for is, let's say with back pain, for example, like, there's not an exercise out there that's the best one for back pain. And the reason why is because back pain's multifactorial. So there's many reasons why you could have it. But, so rather than us maybe getting too fixated on, like, okay, we have to do this program for back pain, let's find movements, postures, exercises that feel comfortable and enjoyable for the individual, and then have them do that. And they've done these controlled trials where, you do a specific lower back core conditioning program, and then you do, like, just a general movement program. And the outcomes are very similar. Sometimes the general one does much better. And so I just think, going back to, maybe we put too many rules on ourselves sometimes. I think there are rules, but I think they're quite loose rules as well. We don't have to be dogmatic in when it comes to biology all the time, especially because there's a lot we don't know as well.
Of course, yeah. Every day is a learning curve, isn't it? So,
yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? Like, if I'm feeling too confident, I know there's something wrong. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if I feel like
anxiety kicks in a bit.
Yeah, whenever I've done certain courses, the biomechanics being one of them, I mean, and I'm not saying that everyone should go through this, because it's not very enjoyable, but whenever I've done a course and it's really, like, changed a paradigm or really challenged how I think about stuff, it takes me like a good year to come out the other side feeling a bit more organized again in how I'm perceiving the body or my own work. And it's really good, really, because what it's doing is it's recalibrating how you might view things. Like, I'm sure you're the same, like, how you coach people now, or how you talk to people now compared to maybe 10 years ago, or how many years ago, is like night and day sometimes.
Always, yeah.
Like, so I find that really interesting. Like, yeah. And I guess one thing, like, I guess a specific example of that would be, I used to think that everyone had to have this biomechanical symmetry, and you had to have everything in place. And then it's not until you realize that, one, genetically, that's probably not possible for most people, and there's plenty of evidence for that. But also, if you want to be good at a sport, you actually probably want to be asymmetrical, because most sports are asymmetrical.
Exactly.
And then you can argue, well, is that healthy? That's a whole other debate. But I think, I mean, one thing I thought that was quite cool, I kind of didn't really realize this till recently. I can't remember where I read it, but it was kind of like, what are the two things that humans are best at physically in the world? Obviously, we're really good thinkers, but what are the two physical activities compared to all other animals we're the best at? The first one was, we're the most efficient walkers on the planet. So we're just very good walkers. And the other one is, we're the best throwers. We're really good at throwing. We're the most accurate throwers. We can throw really far. And so they're both asymmetrical activities. So it's interesting when you think about it that way. And, a lot of our sports mirror that in terms of, I can't even really think of any symmetrical sports really. You're always using one more than the other. So I just think, I think one thing I've been trying to work out recently in my own head with certain athletes is that balance between health and performance. I work with ballet dancers, not recently actually since lockdown, but that's a lot of athletes who I was working with a lot. And the thing there was like, their goal is to be a better dancer basically. And then the sub goals would be, well, I can't get injured, all this stuff. They don't really care about anything else. They just want to dance better and be a better performer. And so, but then there's things they do in ballet. You could argue, well, is that healthy or, and it's trying to find that equilibrium where you're keeping them away from injury, but they're still progressing towards their goal. And I think every sport has that issue to a degree.
And it all boils down to how do you move in that sport? How many force absorption, things like that. Because when we do the testing with the biomechanics testing, such as your knee leg dominance test, things like that, to try and understand, is there any potential roads? We were joking about it with the skeleton beforehand about the rotation of the femur and things like that, but it's understanding the body and why the femur might be rotated, because obviously the pelvis is naturally tilted tilted in the forwards capacity, if that's the right way of putting it. But I was talking to somebody last night, and one of the athletes was doing, I think it was a Bulgarian split squat, I think it was. Because one of the things I'm doing a lot at the moment is working on the unilateral side, which in layman's terms, obviously, the single leg movements or single arm movements. And one of the things we look at is the symmetry between the hips and the shoulders. And I said to the guy, I said, it doesn't really. I says, what we've got to look at is is the person balanced first and foremost, and have they got control of the joints, and what are the joints working properly? Have they got torso control? Because it's so easy as a coach to say, right, well, you're not very good at this, you're not very good at that. But if you look at it and think, right, well, his shoulders are aligned, tick, fantastic. Hips might be a little bit off balance, but then you sort of think, so right, well, the hips are off balance, so surely the shoulders are then one's going to be more elevated than the other. And then you strip it back down, and it gets you. This is what I love about the body, because it always gets you thinking. There's never no one's going to. And again, going back to the practice, practice doesn't make perfect; it makes permanent. There's always something that we need to tweak, and it's always going to be because of how they've moved that day. Have they been, and especially with youngsters, when they're sat at school, they're going to naturally be in that position where they're like that. So naturally, this one shoulder is going to be more overstretched than the other shoulder. So potentially neck. We could go on for hours with potential reasons to why they've got like kyphosis or the
that's the paradigm, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, but I was taught this way. Was very much like, well, if there's a problem, we need to find the exercise for it, or you need to have the right therapy for it, and that's fine, and that obviously can work for loads of people. But like what you just said, but many of the problems that people might present with, they're probably coming from a lot of their daily life movement.
Exactly.
And so you might find an exercise that corrects things, and that actually might work for a lot of people. But unless you actually find that, I don't know, trigger or whatever you want to call it in their daily life that might be producing those problems, you may not get anywhere with it. And I mean, going back to what you were saying about practice makes permanent, practice isn't just in the gym, or it's not when you're with your coach. Like, practice is right now. Like, you're always, one of my mentors, Eric Franklin, always says, you're always dealing with at least two forces all the time, and that's the forces of gravity, and then the forces generated by your muscles. And so it's also how you relate to those forces that's going to have an influence on your body, and that's obviously going to have an influence on your performance. So I think that's another layer, isn't it, to like
100%.
what goes into someone's running gait, or if they can kick their foot over their head, or
exactly.
it's obviously it's what you're doing in the gym or the studio or in the clinic. But most likely, you move more than you exercise. So
100%.
if you address the movement, which is what you do most of the time, then you're probably going to have a more permanent or long-term effect in the direction you want to go in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And it is that, understand your body and make sure you're getting that recovery in as well. I think this is something we could talk about this for absolutely hours on end. And, and I'm sure that there's going to be people watching this. Hopefully there's people watching it anyway. that have got maybe.
We'll do a second podcast. That'd be cool.
No, that sounds. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. That'd be awesome. So for those that might have any questions or anything, Tom, where's the best place that they can find you? Or where can they get involved in your courses?
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. So I'm on Instagram and on Facebook a lot. So I'm tomwaldron.move on Instagram, and then just Tom Waldron Move on Facebook. My website is tomwaldronmovementtherapy.co.uk. So I have webinars that are on there that you can attend and also ask questions about. My email is on there, so tom@tomwaldronmovementtherapy.co.uk. So yeah, if you have any questions, or if I've said something that I've not been clear on, feel free to drop me a message on any of those platforms, and I'll always get back to you at some point and have a conversation. I normally leave voice messages because I get a few messages daily. So I'm terrible at texting. I hate it.
That's
so I just
right.
talk on the phone.
It's
so
personal.
I think so. I think so. So yeah, no, feel free to get in touch. But yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. It was really fun.
Do you know what? I've really enjoyed it. For me, it's been an education, Tom, as well. And it's been good to clarify a few things. It's also been good to challenge my thinking a little bit as well, because I think it's a huge thing. And obviously, what I love about doing these podcasts is speaking to people like yourself who have been in the field a bit longer and got a better understanding, and being able to see things from a different perspective as well, because it's obvious, because that then challenges my thinking and how I can then, of course, impact my athletes and the people I work with as well. So thank you for sharing that with us.
It's the way it should, shouldn't it? There shouldn't really be too much of a hierarchy. It should just be we're all on the same plane and we just talk, and then that's the best we can address people's problems or goals. Yeah.
And this is what I love about things like the Kaizen project and all these expos and everything like that, because you meet everybody. And I say to people all the time, the best thing you can do to educate yourself is to network with people, and then that's when you're going to find out that you've got the right social scene, you've got the right connections, and if you haven't, get rid. And it's the same. Social media is a huge thing with it. People are always there to critique, and if they're always there to critique, and then you think about it, and they're not making, and then all they're having is a negative impact, get rid of them, delete them, block them, what have you, and just keep those that are going to inspire and motivate you to move on. So it's been absolutely fantastic. We'll definitely have a look. We'll have a look at the link. We'll definitely post the links in the comment section below.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic. So guys, get in touch with Tom if you've got any questions. Get booked onto his courses. Be quick to get on them, because they places do fly out the window, and
thankfully they do, which is great.
Exactly. And when you're teaching people in Singapore and Dubai and places like that, someone's got to have some bloody good knowledge if they're teaching in these luxurious places.
That's one of the best things about teaching anatomy, is it doesn't matter what culture you have or what part of the world you're from. We're all made of anatomy, so you can relate on that level, which is cool. 100%. But no, Tom, it's been absolutely fantastic. And I look forward to getting another podcast in for sure. Yeah, thank you, mate.
But good luck with the workshop tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll talk to you soon, mate.
Definitely.